exploring the psychology of fascism and fascist, the word narcissism comes up quite often when we're describing people like Musk, Trump, or even someone like a Kanye West. Often, in particular, the popular media likes to use this phrase of narcissism in order to explain what they view as the sickness or the perversity of this individual person. The Mayo Clinic defines narcissism as a mental health condition in which people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. And certainly, if you look at these people, that would be true. There's a reason this comes up quite frequently, and before I get into that, I want to just describe why I don't like narcissism as a framework. And that is because it presents the choices someone has made in their life. It presents who they are as being some unchanging sickness for which there is proper treatment in the form of therapy. Now, as a therapist, I have worked with a couple of people with narcissism. I've also worked with people with other types of mental health conditions, of people who have been given diagnoses that we believe those people are stuck with that diagnosis, and that's just who they are, and that's not going to change. And a lot of the time people believe that because that's what they've been told. However, in my experience, once you let go of this story that this can't change, then you actually are able to change. And in the case of the narcissist, if you're someone who is looking out for yourself, we're going to get into the reasons why, but if you are this person and other people around you are saying, well, this is just who you are, that doesn't exactly motivate you to change, does it? It doesn't motivate you to take accountability for your actions because, again, that's just who you are. It's like, I don't know if you've heard of this, there's this, the broken staircase, something like theory where, if people live in a place where they have a staircase that's broken, they will unconsciously just step over that staircase rather than like dealing with the consequences of stepping on it. Is we learn to move around the narcissist in our lives, and they learn that they can just stay the way they are, and that's okay. And that's a big part of why we have these characters, these figures that come to occupy public life, is no one's calling them on their bullshit, because instead we're just saying, oh, they're sick, they're ill, there's something wrong with them, but we're not going to hold them accountable. It also obscures the origins of why someone is this way, right? We might say, well, someone's narcissist by birth, their genetics or whatever. And I think it's important to look at the upbringing, because we can look at what are the social conditions that cause that type of upbringing. And then what can we do about that, right? So we can't always stop individual people from making the choices that are linked with narcissism. But what we can do is we can make social choices, social policy, to reduce the conditions in which narcissism thrives and fosters. Sneak peek, yes, I am talking about capitalism, white supremacy, colonialism, patriarchy, etc. The other thing I think narcissism does as a framework is it makes it harder for us, the people who are not narcissists or people who might have been harmed by narcissists, to hold compassion for them. It makes it harder for narcissists to hold compassion for themselves, because it's like, I'm just this bad thing, right? And the people outside of that, if we're not able to hold them accountable, then all we can do is get rid of them, right? So I don't like this frame narcissism, and yet this character of the narcissist, of someone who's very selfish, who's looking out for themselves, who just wants attention, they want to be loved, they want to be validated. This is a character that comes up repeatedly in discussions of the far right, and with good reason, because the people who suffer with narcissism and the people who identify with far right politics tend to have overlapping forms of trauma. So what are those? This is not an exhaustive list, but what I would say is often that trauma stems from a relationship with authority in which someone grew up with a strict authoritarian authority figure, in which they learned that whatever this authority figure says goes, in which they learned that the ways they could exercise power, they could do whatever they wanted. And so power for the narcissist is a means to an end, that end being your own self-gratification. And they learn this from the people with power in their lives when they're at crucial developmental stages early in life. This form of authority and power imbalance, it suppresses individuality. The social environment is quite rigid and controlled. So crucially, people don't learn about play. People don't learn about creativity in an environment that fosters narcissism. There is an emphasis on, children are seen and not heard. Any deviations from expectations is met with punishment. This is where we see things like yelling or hitting of kids, which, you're not a evil person beyond saving if you've done this as a parent. However, whatever you think it's doing, look at the research. It's not doing that. It's causing harm to these children, and it's stunting their development, and it's leading to the development of narcissistic traits. So very much against yelling or hitting of kids, because it creates these outcomes. It creates outcomes where people like Trump or other people in his administration are using the metaphor of an angry father punishing children to describe violence upon minorities or upon political protesters, right? They view this authority as being absolute because there is a strict hierarchy of who is deserving of resources, power, and authority in society, and those at the top are able to do whatever they please to those below them. And it's a hierarchy, it's like a pyramid, so there's layers, right? And this is the promise of white supremacy and whiteness, is white people are welcome to be not at the bottom and to harm people of color below them. This also is why trans people were singled out, so that non-trans people were able to enact power and harm upon trans people, even though people in power actively are harming those people who are useful idiots for them. Goons, if you will. The other thing that I would say the trauma of narcissism is that people are enabled to cause harm, because also what comes with this is the people who harmed them were enabled. So there's cycles of abuse, there's cycles of harm, there's cycles of people not being held accountable. And what that creates in someone is a belief that no one can be held accountable and they have to fend for themselves. It also creates someone who doesn't know what love is, someone who thinks of empathy as a weakness, who looks down upon any vulnerable feelings that they have and any vulnerable feelings that other people have. So you can see how this character of the narcissist, who has endured some extreme developmental trauma, like they have not developed into someone who is able to connect in a way that we would hope. So they have not developed into someone with a sense of self, who is able to trust other people, who is able to work on a team. They're only thinking of themselves because, one, they had to, and two, that was all their authority figures ever thought about. So this trauma is pretty universal in the lives of people who do end up identifying strongly with the far right. Our society creates these conditions as a function of its continued existence. Okay, so let's get into this. What is the psychology of our broader society? Andrewism recently made a great video about the myths of the system. Things such as individualism, inequality, scarcity, meritocracy, or the one truth. These myths of the system create an environment in which we lose sight of our connections to each other, we lose sight of the world around us, and we feel truly like we have to fight and scrape for our survival, right? It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's a rat race. These metaphors put out by the system to normalize what it is like for us. There are those of us who can see through this and people who are not able to, and then there's, of course, like a wide range in the middle. But what it does is it creates this extreme that people who are very vulnerable are pulled towards this radical individualist, this radical competition mindset. And people look out only for themselves, and very much the system is set up so people look out only for themselves. Take, for instance, a landlord. Someone might get into owning and renting property just as a means of being able to secure their own future, right? The alternative is you're working, you're able to make ends meet, but maybe you're paycheck to paycheck. And so you want better for yourself and you want better for your family. Maybe you think about buying property, right? That's a route our society has set up in order for you to make more money. So you have savings, things like that. What ends up happening, this incentives of the system, is that as a landlord, you want to maximize the rent you can extract, you want to minimize your expenses, and that is someone else's living conditions. And so very naturally, you maybe start out as someone who doesn't feel strongly about certain things one way or another, and then because you're brought into the system in this way, because you want to do okay for yourself, then you end up adopting these very harmful ways of being in the world. And you do internalize that. You internalize that, you're deserving of certain things and other people just haven't worked hard enough to get to where you are. You're not seeing the actual advantages you might have had in order to get to that point, right? And so the system has this hidden set of assumptions. Another analogy we could use is to say it's kind of like a game in which we are not quite taught the rules of how to play as working people. Wealthy people are taught the rules. They're given cheat codes. They're given a ton of starting resources. And the rest of us only see the outcomes of the things we try, and we can kind of learn the rules in that way. And also these rules and incentives are working against us, whereas the elites, the rules are working in their favor. They get to shape the rules, whereas the rest of us have to follow them. A lot of what I'm sharing in this section, in addition to Andrewism's video, I'm drawing from Elite Capture, which is a book I'd recommend, a fabulous book. In addition to these myths of the system, what else defines the psychological makeup of our society? I would say something that is pretty important in the psychological makeup of our society that leads to narcissism is the inability to admit wrongdoing, the inability to really meaningfully address problems. So for instance, we take climate change. Elliot Sang recently did a really good video on this one talking about Greta Thunberg. Now Greta has been talking about kind of the underlying problems of capitalism and how this leads to climate change and the urgency of needing to address the problem. And the reason that we have lip service for addressing climate change, but we haven't seen major systemic changes, is because that would require major systemic changes, right? The system doesn't want to upend itself. So the incentives of the system are to say we're dealing with this problem, because if we don't say we're dealing with a problem, then we just have an open, unaddressed problem. So we say we're dealing with it, but we don't actually address it in a way that fundamentally solves the problem, right? So establishment political parties, they just maintain the image of solving problems. Meanwhile, those problems continue to exist and in many cases get worse. This is why all across the world, establishment political parties are losing elections and far-right parties are winning, is because far-right parties don't even claim to want to solve these problems. They're pointing to other problems like immigrants or trans people or whatever else. They're saying these are the problem, these people are the problem, and we're just going to get rid of them and then that's the solution. Of course, this is stupid, right? Like, this isn't going to help anybody. But they are trying or claiming to try to solve a problem. And establishment political parties are allergic to addressing problems in any meaningful way. So you also see this in relation to colonialism, right? So we said, oh, we're decolonial, we're decolonizing, we're addressing the harms of colonization, and yet also colonization continues uninterrupted in so many ways. Africa is still, as a continent, being stripped for resources, with proxy wars happening to fight for those resources, with slavery continuing to exist to further the extraction of those resources. And so why is it that we claim we've moved past colonialism? Well, because the moral imperative of the situation got to be so loud with the outcry of people opposing it that there had to be some reckoning, and the quality of that reckoning was such that we claim we reckoned with it, and yet there is still the same underlying problem taking place. So in both of these ways, we claim to address a problem, and yet the problem is never fully addressed, because to properly address the problem requires the system to change. The system does not want to change. The system resists change. In this way, we lie to ourselves. Societally, we're very short-sighted in that we don't see that, if we really do value, for instance, like profit, like making profit, we would want to address things like climate change, because we cannot make profit if we are all dead. But the system is very short-sighted, and part of the reason why is, again, because of the set of incentives. Corporations are judged based on quarterly profits. I don't know about you, but a tree doesn't grow in a quarter. The ocean doesn't warm in a quarter. And so for them, it's easy just to classify problems as externalities. And you see this also with the narcissist. Any problem that someone else has with the narcissist behavior, rather than the narcissist looking within and saying, I caused harm, I need to be accountable, instead what this character of the narcissist will do is to say, no, you're the problem, actually. You react to me, and that causes me to do these things, right? So they ignore the origins of themselves starting the problem. They look at someone's response to what they did, and they say, that's the problem. It's not me. And you see this with far-right parties as well. You see this. So again, when it comes to the psychological makeup of our society, the subject of domination comes up because some people do deeply want to dominate others, and yet all of the things I've been talking about, these myths about admitting wrongdoing, about wanting to address system change, and also on the subject of domination, wanting to dominate versus wanting to upend domination, there are these two opposing poles, right? So there's the right we've been talking about, and then there's the left. And I think that within each of us there is this split. Deleuze and Guattari talk about this in Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, another great book. When we've been exposed to a strictly authoritarian hierarchy, we might seek a place for ourselves in that hierarchy so that other people cannot harm us. Or we might say that the hierarchy itself is the problem and other people shouldn't have to experience this, nor should we. So we should get rid of the hierarchy itself. But Part of what happens is people who welcome the domination, who seek to be a part of the hierarchy, they also seek to be dominated, right? Like there's this desire to have a strong authority figure to tell them what to do so that because these people are fundamentally insecure, so they don't have to make those decisions themselves, right? Someone else can tell them, and they never take responsibility. Again, that's, I think, the piece around domination comes back to, for people who desire to dominate others, is they actually don't want anything. They just want everyone. Like it's driven by this fundamental like fear of their own behavior catching up to them, and so rather than being accountable or like listening to the ways they've caused harm, it's scorched earth. Just burn it all to the ground, make everyone else pay for saying that they're causing a problem. And we go back to this inability to take accountability and to meaningfully address problems. Is the far right claims there's no problem whatsoever. They create their own problems of, the people who say that there are problems, whereas those of us on the left, and particularly like vulnerable populations, we are correctly identifying problems that absolutely do need to be addressed in order for humanity to continue to survive, for our Earth to survive the coming years, right? So the psychological makeup of our society is very much set up to create this narcissist character. I would recommend the same things if you're dealing with a narcissist in your personal life as what I would recommend on a population level to deal with far-right politics. Keep hold of the truth. They will try to undermine you. They will try to erode your connection with your understanding of the truth. We need to keep hold of the truth. And so what does that mean? So personally, we can make art. We can keep a journal. We can collect information, things like news articles, things like pictures to like show things that are happening. Socially, we can talk with our friends, and our friends can help remind us of things that have happened. Or collectively, we can do things like maintain offline publications. We can do things like, speak from one friend group to another friend group, something called a whispered network, as we keep each other informed of things. It's important to keep hold of the truth. The other thing I would say in terms of what we can do about the presence of narcissism in our society is to act in the opposite way that they would want us to, right? Because the far-right personality would want to dominate someone who is disempowered. They don't want an equal, right? If you ever challenge someone who is so selfish and who is so just thinking of themselves and will take whatever they please, if you challenge them, they often will throw a fit. They often will crumple at the signs of any backlash. So we actually need that, because if we act in the ways that they want us to, then they will be able to do as they please. They want us to act in alignment with their values. And so something I've been thinking about is the kind of 4 F's of trauma: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I have a video about that I'll link. Is fascists want us to be doing one of those things, if not multiple. They want us caught up in a trauma response, stuck doing these things, because if you think about it, that feeds into their agenda. If you fight, they'll be able to suppress you. If you flee, they'll be able to do as they please. If you fawn, they'll be able to do as they please. If you freeze, they'll be able to do as they please. All of these things they want us to do. Why? Because if we're grounded, if we're connected to each other, then we actually don't have to respond to them from a place of giving them what they want. When we are in this place of being a trauma response, we don't have access to our full capacities. And that's the key, is that is them all the time. They are always operating from a place of fear, of scarcity, of uncertainty, self-doubt. That is the psychological makeup of the far right. And so if we're able to stay connected to each other on the left, if we're able to call out this behavior, then we have the upper hand psychologically. We can stay connected. We don't have to just react to them. That's what they want us to be doing. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, mixed feelings about the theory, but I will share a skill with you that I learned from it that I appreciate, called opposite action. So what that is basically is when we have a feeling, we react in the opposite way of how we might want to act. So for instance, if I'm feeling like I want to hide, as I have been feeling, because of everything happening, the principle of opposite action says, because you have this desire, it is ever more important to be visible and to be seen, because to hide is actually not going to resolve the problem. So whatever trauma, fear, whatever different type of response we're having, if we know it's coming from a place of reactivity, the skill of opposite action might be a useful tool in moving away from that towards a more connected place. And the other thing I'll say, it might not happen right away. I would say look for little steps where this can take place. One question for you as we're ending this video. Can you acknowledge the presence of this character, of a far right belief system or reactivity within you? Because we have the full breadth of human experiences within us, and it's really the things we choose that define us, right? So if I choose kindness, if I choose grace, rather than how I sometimes feel, irritable, angry, fearful, sad, mean, I can choose grace, but I still have that character within me. The presence of the myths of the system and the desire to act on the values of the system. Of course, consciously and logically we can say, like, I don't want this. But there is a part somewhere inside. Can you see that part? How can you build an alliance with that part of you? How can you make peace with the fascist within? And I think when we really engage with that question, we will know how to rehabilitate, how to support the people who have been caught in fascism, whether that's our coworkers, our family, our friends, whether that's people we meet at demonstrations or wherever else. Like, how can we make an alliance with that part, that fearful, avoidant, angry, bitter part that exists within us? What can that teach us, right? So share your thoughts below. I also have a little note for my returning viewers. Hello. Thank you for returning and for watching this video. I've been struggling. I've been wanting to come back for quite some time. And to tell you the truth, the kind of stress brought on by the system has made it really hard. And if you want to hear more about that, I think Lily Alexander talks about it really well in her most recent video. The long and the short of it is feeling like a younger version of yourself because of not having the agency and feeling this sense of like just needing to survive and get through until you can get away from your environment, whatever that means. So I'm hoping I'll maybe make some more videos talking about this, but Lily Alexander's video I really liked. Maybe you can relate. Have had a hard time connecting with my creative muscles during this time, but I want to do that. It's important. If you found value in this video, or if you found value in my other videos, please let me know in the comments. It'll really help me to keep doing it. So, yeah. Special shout out to my one patron who's been holding it down all these months, Arena. Hope I'm saying that right. I really appreciate it. I don't have any extra content planned for the Patreon at this moment. If you want to support me financially, it really helps. Otherwise, I'm just going to try and get back into posting regular channel videos, and maybe at some point down the road there will be something there on the Patreon. Thanks for everything. Keep fighting. See you next time.